A simple walk around the city turns a young woman's life into a nightmare that no one around her dares to stop. A police uniform becomes a shield for those who break the law instead of protecting it. But one victim decides to speak up and sets off a chain reaction that can no longer be stopped. When the truth comes to light, the system begins to crack, and silence becomes the main enemy. Don't forget to subscribe and like so you don't miss new stories. The city had not yet sunk into the evening noise. The sun's rays slid across the shop windows and glass facades of buildings, giving everything a golden glow. At the Haven Cafe in downtown Brooklyn, the aromas of cinnamon, coffee, and light pastries slowly dissolved into the air. People hurried about their business, not noticing a woman in a neat white dress sitting at a table on the terrace, responding with a slight smile to a friend's joke. It was Emma Lawrence, a literature teacher, reserved, elegant, with eyes that always shone with warmth. She had just said goodbye to friends after a long day at work, and now she was walking along the sidewalk, heading toward the subway. In one hand was a phone, in the other an elegant black bag. Everything seemed normal, calm, predictable. Her path was blocked by two men in police uniform. One was tall with broad shoulders and a heavy, assessing gaze. His face was almost stony, his voice cold. On his stripe was a name, Sergeant Jake Marlowe. Next to him stood a young officer, reserved, a little tense, with features that showed inner uncertainty. It was Michael Turner, a newcomer, with a notion of service and justice that had not yet faded. "Good evening, ma'am," Jacob began, his tone indifferent. "We've received a report of a theft nearby. Could you show me the contents of your bag?" Emma froze. Her smile disappeared, and her body, as if it had sensed the alarm before her mind, tensed. She looked from one officer to the other. "Excuse me?" she asked, trying to remain polite. "I just left the cafe. I met up with some friends. I have nothing to do with the theft." "It's standard procedure," Jake interrupted. His voice was level, but there was authority in it. "We need to make sure." "You have no right without a warrant," Emma began, but her words were cut off by a sharp gesture. Jake stepped forward and snatched the bag from her hands. His fingers yanked the strap roughly out of her hand, and he began rummaging around inside, spilling the contents onto the sidewalk. Wallet, keys, tissues, a book. "Hey!" Emma tried to take her thing back. "This is illegal. Give me back my bag." But Jacob didn't even look up. His fingers were already finishing the check. He threw the bag back. "Clean," he said, then added, "but we need to be sure you're not hiding anything, like under your clothes." "What?" Emma took a step back. "No, you can't. You have no right." "Put your hands up," Jake said sharply, stepping closer. His hand reached for the hem of her dress. Emma tried to hold on to the fabric. Her heart was pounding. Her eyes darted around as passers-by began to stop. Some glanced, some took out their phones, but no one intervened. "This," whispered an elderly woman passing by. "This is terrible. My God." "Just another privileged one," said her companion, without looking away. "Stop," Emma's voice trembled. "You're humiliating me! This is an abuse of power!" Jake chuckled, and, without listening, roughly lifted the hem of her dress to her knees. The crowd began to whisper. Someone turned away. Someone took out a phone, but did not film. No one knew how to react. "Stop it!" Emma shouted, retreating. "This is a violation of my rights." She turned to Michael, her eyes, full of despair and hope, catching his. "You know this is wrong. Please say something." Michael took a step back. He couldn't meet her gaze. I have to follow protocol," he squeezed out, looking down. "Are you serious?" she whispered. "You're standing here and letting him do this?" Jake returned to her as if nothing had happened. "There's nothing here," he said, "but we can continue checking." Emma's voice trembled with anger and shame. "You will not go unpunished. I will file a complaint. You will answer for this." Jacob shrugged. "Good luck, girl. I'm the law here." He turned and walked away. Michael followed, his steps slow, as if his legs wouldn't obey him. The crowd was dispersing. Some were whispering. Some were pretending not to have seen anything. And Emma stood in the middle of the street, her hem hanging down, breathing heavily. Her cheeks were burning. Her heart was beating as if it would burst her chest. There were tears in her eyes, but she held back. She had been humiliated, insulted, and no one had stood up for her. She turned and walked away, quickly, silently. Her hands were shaking, the strap of her bag cutting into her fingers. Everything seemed unreal, like a nightmare from which she could not wake up. That same night, she sat in front of the mirror. Her hair was disheveled, her dress thrown over a chair. Her eyes reflected that moment over and over again. Her hands reached for the notebook. She began to write, every detail, every word, every look. Not to complain. For now, for herself. So as not to forget. So as not to allow herself to believe that it did not happen. Because it did. And she wasn't going to keep quiet. The night had been hard. The scene on the street kept playing over and over in Emma's head. Jake's cold gaze, his hands roughly grabbing her bag, his mocking face, and Michael's silence, his downcast eyes. Every time she tried to fall asleep, she saw the moment when her dress was lifted in front of passers-by, and her protest was drowned out by a voice confident of its impunity. She didn't just feel ashamed, she felt that something inside her had broken. But in that fracture, there was another feeling. Deeper, stronger. The injustice had burned her from the inside, leaving a scar that could no longer be covered by apologies. In the morning, with her eyes still red from lack of sleep, Emma did what had previously seemed impossible to her. She picked up the phone and called her best friend, Jasmine. "He humiliated me," Emma's voice shook, but there was restrained fury in it. "Right on the street, he just did it, and no one helped." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Jasmine's voice, sharp and decisive. "You can't leave it like this. Emma, you have to speak up. He has to be punished. You're not alone." These words became the starting point. Emma began writing a statement. She formulated each phrase precisely, carefully, reading each word. She relived everything again, but now not as a victim, but as a witness. When the text was finished, she sent it to herself, printed it out, and put it in a folder. The next day, her knees shaking, she walked into the police station where Jake Marlowe worked. The large lobby was bustling with activity. The receptionist, a woman with a short haircut, glanced at her. "How can I help you?" "I want to file a complaint," Emma's voice was clear despite her inner turmoil, "about the actions of one of your employees. His name is Jake Marlowe." The woman froze for a second. Something in her face changed, but she quickly returned to a neutral expression. "Wait here," she said, and disappeared behind the door. Emma waited. The minutes dragged on painfully. A man in uniform passed, then two more. They glanced at her, not hostilely but too attentively. Her fingers clutched the folder. The words rolled through her head. "You are not alone. He must be punished. You are not alone." The door opened. He stood in front of it. Jake, in uniform, with the same predatory gaze, his lips twisted into a familiar grin. "Emma Lawrence," he said. "Come to lodge a complaint? How brave of you." "I have a right to do this," she said. Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. "And you won't stop me." He stepped closer, leaning over the counter so that there was only air between them. "Do you think your complaint will change anything? I'm part of this system, got it? And you're nobody. Nobody will believe you." Emma took a step back, her eyes blazing with anger. "If this system covers you, I'll go higher. I won't stop." Jake shrugged. "Good luck, girl." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the hall, her heart pounding in her chest. But she felt no fear now, only determination. Meanwhile, across town, Michael Turner sat in his office, staring at the screen. He replayed the scene on the street in his head, Emma's expression, her despair, his own role, his silence. He knew things had gone too far, but he didn't know what to do. He'd heard that Jake had connections in the department. He knew that any dissent could cost him his job. "Michael, are you okay?" Ryan's senior colleague's voice brought him out of his stupor. "It's okay," Michael muttered. But deep down, he felt that he couldn't go on like this. Emma returned home that evening. Her husband, Alex, was already waiting, worried. She told him what had happened at the station. His face hardened. "It won't end like this. We'll find a way, Emma. We won't let him get away." She looked into his eyes. There was more than just love in them. There was power. She sat down at the table and began to write. Names, details, dialogues. Names of people she remembered who had been there that evening on the street. An elderly couple. A man in a jacket. A woman in a coat. Maybe one of them had seen something. Someone would want to help, even if anonymously. Later, Jasmine sent her the number of a human rights organization that specialized in cases against the police. Emma called. A woman named Rose answered. Her voice was calm, as hard as concrete. "We're here to help. You don't have to do this alone. Come tomorrow, and bring everything you have." Emma hung up. Her fingers were still shaking. But inside, where once there had been only anxiety, there was now a light. Small, fragile, but alive. She knew the journey would be long, but she had a voice, and she was ready to talk. Emma's fingers trembled as she pressed the button for the elevator in the building where Women's Voice was located. There was a modest sign next to the door and a logo with two intertwined hands, symbolizing support and protection. Her heart was pounding, just like the day she'd first decided to go outside after the attack. When she reached the third floor, she found herself in a small but bright waiting room. The air was filled with the scent of lavender, and the walls were lined with photographs of women smiling after what seemed like a long struggle. Standing against the soft light was a woman in her mid-30s, with short black hair, a confident posture, and alert eyes. It was Rose Garcia, the legal coordinator Emma had spoken to on the phone the day before. "You must be Emma Lawrence," she said warmly, extending her hand. "Welcome. Please come in. You can feel safe here." The word safe rang out especially strongly. Emma nodded, clutching the folder with the complaint. They walked into a small conference room. Waiting for them inside was a young man with glasses, soft features, and a calm, confident voice. His name was Pablo Morales, a lawyer for the organization who specialized in cases involving government violence. "First of all, Emma," he began, "thank you for your courage. We understand how difficult it is not only to live through this, but to even talk about it. But the more you tell us, the stronger our case will be." Emma opened the folder. Her voice shook at first, but it became firmer as she spoke. She described every action Jake Marlowe had taken, every look he had given her, every movement of his hands, every phrase he had spoken. She remembered everything, the expressions on the faces of passers-by, Michael's silence, her fear, humiliation, and anger. Rose took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Pablo took notes without interrupting. "You weren't the first," Rose said suddenly when Emma had finished. "We've had anonymous reports of similar actions by Sergeant Marlowe, but no one has dared to follow through." "Now I dare," Emma said quietly. "And you won't be alone," Pablo added. "But for the case to be valid, we need additional testimony. We've already started looking for possible victims. But you and your husband, you can help too. Maybe on social media or forums you'll find people who've ever encountered him. Even one message could lead us to someone important." That evening, when Emma returned home, Alex was already at his laptop. He was scrolling through city groups, forums, tweets, posts. The search was tedious. He typed in, Brooklyn police abuse, Officer Jake Marlowe, street search. There was a lot of anger, complaints, shared stories, but soon he came across a post from months ago. A young woman named Marina Davis described being pulled over by a police officer late at night, accused of theft, and asked to search her. She didn't give a name, but his description, tall, icy-eyed, abrupt, matched Jake. Alex immediately messaged her. The next morning, Marina agreed to meet. She was quiet, wary, and her movements showed an inner constraint. They sat in a small cafe. Alex explained the situation, told about Emma, about the organization. "I tried to forget," Marina said quietly. "I was afraid. He said he would put me in jail if I told anyone. I thought it was just me." "You're not alone," Alex said. "We're building a case. If you can at least give a written statement." Marina was silent for a long time. Then she nodded. "Okay. If it helps others, I'll do it." Inspired by their success, they continued searching. Alex spent the entire day in front of his computer. On a women's forum, he found a comment from a woman named Carolina Morales, a cashier at a supermarket. She described how a police officer had publicly searched her, ripped her blouse, and given no reason. He wrote to her. At first, she didn't respond, but a day later, she sent, "If you're really fighting him, I'm with you." A day later, she met with Rose. Her story was terrifying, humiliating, but she agreed to sign a statement. Later, Clara Mendez, an older woman and mother of 3, showed up, stopped in a park by Jake, and searched in front of passers-by. Her story was the last straw. Rose called Emma. "We already have 3 statements, not counting yours. All are ready to testify. And that's not all. We got a call from someone inside the station. Someone who works with Jake wants to talk." Emma froze. "Who?" "For now, he wants to remain anonymous. But we hope that he will become an important part of our strategy." That man was Michael Turner. He couldn't sleep at night. His conscience was tearing him apart. He remembered Emma's face, her tears, and his own silence. He couldn't stand it any longer. He contacted Rose. They met in a small cafe. Michael was pale, nervous, looking around. "I saw what he did," he said. "I didn't know what to do. If I spoke up, I'd be fired, but I can't stay silent any longer. I'm ready to testify." He provided dates, internal documents, shift printouts, onboard camera footage that had disappeared later. He knew who had erased the footage. He was part of the system, but now he was part of the truth. "Thank you," Rose said. "You don't understand how important this is." "I understand," he said, "and that's why I'm here." When Emma heard this, she cried. For the first time, she cried out of relief. Now she had a team, not just lawyers, but women who had the courage to speak up. And a man who had finally decided to do the right thing. They weren't related or friends. They were connected by Jake. They were united by injustice. And now they were united by what was most important, the determination to stop it. The courtroom was silent, heavy, thick, as if the air itself was saturated with tension. Emma sat on the bench next to Alex, clutching a folder of documents. Her fingers were shaking, but her eyes were clear. In front of her was a table marked Plaintiff. Next to them were Rose and Pablo. They were quietly discussing something, but Emma was no longer listening. All her thoughts were directed at the man sitting on the opposite side of the room, Jake Marlowe. In uniform, with his back straight and his face frozen in a smirk, he radiated the same self-confidence, as if nothing had happened. As if all this was just an unpleasant episode that he would get over and forget, like everyone else. The judge entered, and the court stood up. An elderly man with gray hair and an attentive gaze sat on the dais and looked around at those present. He read the case file, nodded, and signaled for the lawyers to begin. It all began. The first few hours were devoted to formal statements. Jake's lawyer, dressed in an immaculate dark gray suit, spoke with polished politeness. My client is a respected police officer with many years of experience. All charges are based solely on subjective feelings. In conditions of increased danger and uncertainty, officers are forced to act quickly and decisively. Sometimes this can be perceived as rudeness, but this is not a crime. This is a job. Pablo stood up, looking the judge in the eye. We are not talking about work. We are talking about human rights violations. We are talking about systematic actions that humiliate the dignity of women committed under the guise of uniform and rank. And today we will prove that behind the indifference and silence there was a system. But behind this system, there was a specific person. Then they called the first witness, Marina. She walked into the room, carrying a notebook. Her steps were uneven. She sat down in a chair and swore an oath to tell the truth. When the first question was asked, her voice trembled. It happened in the evening. I was returning home. He said that I looked like a suspect. He asked to show me my bag. I tried to explain, but he took me to an alley. There. He started demanding that I take off my jacket. I couldn't understand what was happening. The defense attorney immediately intervened. Dear court, let me remind you that the witness did not provide any photographs or recordings. We only have her words. My words are enough, Marina said with difficulty but firmly. Because I'm not alone, because he did it again and again. Then Caroline spoke. Her voice was firmer. There was outrage in her story, not just pain. He ripped my blouse off right in front of the customers, she said. He accused me of stealing, without presenting any evidence. I stood there in front of him, humiliated, and he didn't even try to hide it. He knew he would get away with it. Jake's lawyer tried to confuse her again. You had conflicts at work. Perhaps this is personal revenge? Revenge? Caroline asked. For what? Because I wanted to be respected? I didn't come here for revenge. I came to tell the truth. Clara was next. She spoke slowly, clearly. Her voice sounded like a mother's, protecting not only herself, but others as well. I'm sitting on a bench, resting, and he comes up to me and says that I'm suspicious. And without asking, he starts searching me, in front of everyone. I could have been his mother. And still, for him, I was just a sack that could be turned upside down. After each woman, the judge took notes. His face remained neutral, but his eyes betrayed his attentiveness, and perhaps sympathy. Then it was Michael's turn. Jake tensed as he entered the room. Michael looked ahead, avoiding his gaze. He sat down, took the oath, and lowering his head for a moment, began. I was there the day it happened to Emma Lawrence. I saw Jake overstep his authority. I saw her beg him to stop. I saw him ignore her. He took a deep breath. I was silent. I was afraid. I didn't want to lose my job. But now I understand that my silence is part of the problem, and I can't be part of the silence anymore. Jake's head snapped up. You are a traitor, he said through clenched teeth. Michael looked at him for the first time in a long time. I am a human being, and you have forgotten what that means. The room froze. The defense attorney tried to shift the focus, to press, to confuse, but it was all in vain. Michael's testimony was the turning point. Rose presented her findings, internal documents, complaints that had been lost, other people's testimonies, anonymous appeals that had previously been ignored. It all came together to form a coherent picture. Behind the facade of a strict but fair officer was a man who was confident of impunity and who used it with particular cynicism. It was Emma's turn. She stood up. She walked to the witness stand as if she were walking on ice. Everything inside her was clenching, but she was no longer the same woman who stood in the middle of the street, clutching the hem of her dress to her knees. She was different. He took away my sense of safety, she said. He did it in front of people who were silent. I screamed, I protested, but his eyes told me, you are nobody. Today I say, I am not nobody. I am a human being. And I have the right to be protected from people like him. The judge closed the case for deliberation. Everyone waited. 2 hours passed, then the verdict. After reviewing all the evidence, testimony, and materials presented, the judge said, the court finds Jake Marlowe guilty of abuse of power, civil rights violation, and violation of official ethics. A term of imprisonment of 5 years with a subsequent ban on employment with the police is imposed. There was silence in the room. Emma exhaled. Someone started to cry. Carolina squeezed Marina's hand. Clara nodded, as if to say, "We did it." Jake sat with his head down. His shoulders were shaking, but not from anger anymore, but from realization. When Emma stepped outside, she was greeted by sunlight. Alex was waiting at the door. He hugged her, and in that embrace there was everything: support, pride, and a silence that was no longer frightening. It wasn't just a victory in court. It was a victory over fear, over loneliness, over a system that had been silent for too long. And now it was speaking. The day after the trial began in silence. Emma woke early, her room bathed in the soft light of morning. Alex was still asleep, his hand on her shoulder like an anchor, keeping her in the present. Her body was tired, but her mind was clear, focused. She stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in weeks, she felt no fear of what would happen next. Jake Marlowe had been found guilty. He was no longer in her life. But the fight that had begun on the sidewalk in front of the cafe did not end with the verdict. Later, she was sitting at the kitchen table over a cup of coffee when Alex brought over his laptop, opened a news site, and turned the screen toward her. The front page was a photograph from the courtroom. The headline, "Officer Found Guilty. Woman Who Brought Suit Inspired Dozens." Neither Emma nor the other women were named, but the article spoke of a precedent-setting case, of the men and women who came forward to testify despite their fears, and of one man who had dared to break the silence within the system. "Have you seen this?" Alex asked, looking at her face. "People are already sharing it. The comments are full of support." Emma nodded, a small but genuine smile playing on her lips. She wasn't looking for fame. She wanted to make sure this never happened again, to her or anyone else. Soon after the publication, the calls began. First from Rose, who said she was getting requests from organizations that wanted to collaborate, to use the case as a basis for training and changes in how they approached internal investigations. Then from Pablo, who said they were launching an internal review process at the police department, and Jake's name wasn't at the top of the list. And then from Maria, a volunteer at a nearby women's center, who asked Emma to speak at a meeting of young women, to tell her story. Emma didn't agree right away. Her voice still shook sometimes, but she felt she had to. At the first meeting, in a room with white walls and dozens of wary glances, she held a glass of water in her hands and talked. About herself. About how one simple evening turned into a nightmare. About how difficult it was to talk. And how important it was to talk anyway. Some of the women in the room lowered their eyes. Some clenched their fists. One girl of about 19 burst into tears and came up to Emma after the meeting, hugged her silently. Then she said, "I thought there was something wrong with me, but now I know. There is something wrong with them. Thank you." Meanwhile, Caroline and Marina began to talk, too. Clara joined a community group fighting for city code reform. Michael, who had left the department, began law school, dreaming of one day helping those he once could not. One day, late in the evening, Rose invited everyone to a meeting, an informal one, in a small room with tea, cookies, and simple folding chairs. Everyone was there: Emma, Alex, Caroline, Marina, Clara, Pablo, Michael. No big words, no speeches. Just an evening of looks that already understood each other without words. They didn't talk about Jake. They talked about how they slept now, how their lives had changed, how they walked past a policeman and no longer felt terror. "Remember," said Caroline, "how you said in court, 'I'm not nobody'? Since then, every time I'm afraid, I repeat it to myself. I'm not nobody. And it works. Because you really are no one, Emma replied. Not you, not us, not any of us. And we never will be again. Michael was nearby, looking out the window. He didn't say much. But when Emma approached him, he said, "Thank you for making me not afraid to tell the truth. Without you, I would have remained silent." "But you said it anyway," she replied, "and it changed everything." Over time, Rose and Pablo began working on an educational program called The Right to Say No, based on the real-life stories of women like Emma. They held a training session for young police officers, where Michael spoke about how easy it is to become an accomplice if you don't speak up. There were young cadets in the audience, and some of them might have asked themselves for the first time, "What would I do?" Emma's life gradually returned to normal. She taught at the university again, walked around the city, met with friends. But now there was another path in her life, the path of a woman who said, "Enough," and did not back down. When someone on campus, not knowing her story, asked why she spoke so confidently about civil rights, she simply replied, "Because I paid for it with the right to silence, and I decided I will not remain silent anymore." In the spring, she received a letter from a young girl in another state who had read her story in a magazine. The girl wrote that she had gone through something similar, and that reading about the trial had given her the strength to contact the organization. Emma stared at the screen for a long time, then printed out the letter and hung it on the wall. Next to it was a photo from the courtroom, where she was standing holding Alex's hand, and behind her were Marina, Carolina, and Clara, smiling. Not the winners, but those who were no longer afraid. A year passed. Emma walked out of the courthouse on the same day her trial began, only this time not as a victim, but as a guest. She was returning to support another woman standing at the entrance, her fingers shaking, a yellow folder in her hands. Is it you?" the woman whispered. "You're the one." Emma nodded, came closer, took her hand. "I've been where you are, and I know, it's scary to walk, but standing is scarier." The woman began to cry. Then she straightened up. They entered the building together. Because justice doesn't always start with the law. Sometimes it starts with one person who said, "You shouldn't have done that," and another who whispers back, "I believe you." This was the real victory.